The presenting sponsor for OnEducation is Schoology. Schoology's passion lies in helping instructors and students have the best education experience possible. Schoology is a collaborative, student-focused, and faculty-centered learning management system. Students love Schoology because it gives them 24/7 access to course materials, real-time feedback from their instructors, and easy-to-use collaborative tools. Teachers love the streamlined workflow, integrated apps such as Google and Microsoft tools, and the ability to view evidence of student learning for making instructional decisions. To learn more about what is possible with Schoology, simply visit Schoology.com.
Can I just say, any test that has an acronym that large can't be good. Welcome to OnEducation. I'm Mike Washburn.
And I'm Glen Irvin. Friends, we have an awesome pod for you today. We will discuss what high-stakes tests are required by each state, how to go from building cities in games to building cities in real life. And our guest this week is educator and author of the amazing book, The New Childhood, Jordan Shapiro.
We should give everyone a farm together update.
Yes. How are the farms doing?
My farm is out of control. I sent you a message this morning because I've realized now that if I have to clear everything and replant everything, it's easily 2 hours now.
2 hours. That's why I hired a bunch of farm hands. But no, if you've never played this game before, you started off with this little plot of land. And sometimes you actually ran out of things to do because you ran out of money or whatever it might be. You didn't have enough to be able to plant more things. And at this point, I just look at the expanse and go, I don't even know where to start.
I realized,
yeah, go ahead.
I realized a couple things this week about my farm together addiction. And that's that, you know, you're in it when you're reading Reddit.
Yes, exactly. When you're studying the techniques, the intricacies of the game.
So I am definitely on Reddit twice a day now, reading the Farm Together Reddit page, which is how you know you went over the deep end. But also, so reading Reddit, I realized that you're getting more money and experience than I am because I have that flat farm and you get a deduction. I guess
that. Yeah.
So that's why, because I've been wondering
the penalty.
I've been wondering why your level is higher than mine and you have way more money than I do. It's because I'm getting dinged, because I think we're playing about the same amount in terms of hours played, in and around 170, 180 now, I think.
Yeah, I'm at 220 now.
Oh my God.
But I just left it on. You know what I mean? I leave it on overnight and whatever it might be, just so I could keep accumulating money.
Yeah, I'm starting to leave it on so I can pray to God that people get in it and do some work for me.
Please come over.
I posted that on Reddit. I'm like, guys, just don't harvest the animals. Everything else, just go crazy, please.
Go crazy.
At this
Plant and harvest anything you want. Just go.
I need all the help I can get. So
yes,
there we go. And I'm going away. So I was gone all last week.
Yes, you've been traveling a lot.
And I'm gone all next week too.
Yes.
So I need help farming my farm. So listen, if you were on the fence about this and you're listening, Farm Together. It's on Steam.
It's
go,
$20.
Please buy it and then farm my farm. I'll leave my laptop on in the hotel room or whatever. So I was in Edmonton.
Yes.
This week at ERLC. It's the probably one of the bigger conferences, ed tech conferences in Alberta.
Okay.
And I was there with friends Brian Aspinall and AJ Giuliani. Super good dudes. This was an awesome, if you could pick no better people to hang out with at a conference, it's these guys. We just had a blast. Yeah. It was so fun to just be around them and talk and, have dinner together and all of that stuff. We had a great time. So many interesting things came up. Some things that just blew my mind too. I want to bring up one thing because I've been thinking about it all week, and that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, my wheelhouse was project-based learning. That's basically what I did.
Yes.
From grade 5 to grade 8, all of my assignments and lessons and everything was centered around project-based learning for these kids. And I tell you, file under what I wish I knew then, what I know now, because AJ talks about project-based learning as well. Like that's kind of his thing as well. And one of the things that he said, and he said it a bunch of times and even had like a rubric, is he talked about assessing the process, not the final product.
Love that.
And I wish I had done that. I'm telling you, I'm admitting that all that I assessed when I assessed project-based learning was the final product.
Sure.
And I'm
sure
wish
that happens.
In hindsight, I'm like, it was like a light bulb went off in my head when he said that. And I was like, damn, I was doing it all wrong the whole time. I could have done so much more interesting assessment and meaningful assessment if I had been assessing the process instead of the final product. And he has a rubric. You should go on to AJ's website, look him up, AJ Giuliani. We'll put his website in the show notes, but he has a project-based learning process rubric.
Yeah.
Specifically that assesses the way that kids work through projects, and not assessing the final product almost at all. It was, I wish I had that 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
Very interested in sharing that out too, Mike. I mean, I know a lot of people are yep. And they're
my head just exploded. I couldn't believe it. I was like, man, what was I doing my whole life when I wasn't doing this? And it's I guess as a teacher, you keep learning and you keep,
absolutely,
growing and finding new things. But man, this is something I could have used pretty bad, And so it was pretty wild. So hopefully, if you're doing a lot of project-based learning, you need to take a look at this. Think about how you're assessing the projects, and think about how you could assess the process and not the product.
Yes.
I think that is my biggest takeaway from ERLC. Next week I'm at Wonder Workshop all week, so I'm super pumped to be in San Francisco. I'll be working out of the Wonder Workshop head office for I guess Tuesday, Wednesday, and almost all of Thursday. Lots of meetings, lots of cool conversations are going to happen. So I'm going to be in California. If you live in San Francisco, folks, hit me up.
Yep. DM him.
I sent a message to Alice, but she's a little far away. She's like 3 hours away. And
where's she at? Fresno?
So that's, I think, 3 hours away. A little far for a dinner. But hopefully, if there's anyone else in the San Francisco general area, one other thing, little pet peeve. Everywhere I go, there is no sporting events going on while I'm there. They're always either happening the day before or the day after. All the home games are either a day before or a day after. I've been in Edmonton. I've been in Winnipeg. I'll be in San Francisco. I could go to Oakland for a game of San Jose Sharks. No one is at home. What the hell? It's so frustrating because all I want to do is check off bucket list things. While I'm out. I mean, I couldn't even go to a Winnipeg Jets game. They weren't at home. It was pretty frustrating. So I need to better arrange my schedule. Actually, I think I'm going to Vancouver in April, and the last Canucks game of the season is the day after we leave. In April.
Again, bad timing.
So frustrating. So frustrating. Awesome. Hey, speaking of frustrating.
Testing.
Let's talk about tests, because this is our second favorite punching bag, especially for Glen, other than teachers pay teachers.
It's right on the same level.
Right, is standardized tests.
Yes.
And you've come up with this really interesting article talking about what each state requires in terms of standardized testing.
It's interesting to go ahead and take a look at this, and we'll make sure we link it in the show notes. But the title is, what tests does each state require? I think it's important for us as educators, doesn't matter which state you're actually in, to take a look at kind of a nationwide picture of what is happening and how many states are doing what they're doing, and whether or not we should all be headed down in certain directions. So one of the biggest things and the first things that's actually mentioned on this in this article is this use of the PARCC test, PARCC. And if you're not familiar with the PARCC test because you're from the Midwest or some other states that don't use it, it's an acronym that says it's a partnership for assessment of readiness for college and careers. And it's basically a group of states that work together to develop and administer state exams. So in Minnesota, we have something called the MCA, the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment. And anyway, this PARCC exam was pretty popular at one point in time, and a bunch of the different states have actually pulled away from it and started developing their own, which I don't even know.
Can I just say,
go ahead.
Can I just say any test that has an acronym that large can't be good.
I know, it's so gigantic.
It's the acronym itself is scary,
yes,
let alone the test.
Exactly.
So there's your first hint.
Exactly, big hint there. And there's 15 states that actually administer the PARCC exam on this, and then 32 states that use their own types of state tests that they've designed. So sort of like Minnesota, the MCA that we have here, and then 3 states that use a mixture of different assessments. Also in this list. And if you're an educator, especially at the secondary level, you're familiar with this, that some states do require their students to take the SAT or the ACT. So I'm not sure of how many states actually require a specific score. And I'm not sure if that's actually the case, Mike, but I know that certain states do require just you taking it, which is interesting though when you have all of your students. Minnesota used to be one of these states, and we would require all of our students to take the ACT, and then all of those scores then would be compared to other state scores then, Mike. And so you have like basically every student, even students that aren't interested in specific academic, they're not academic, university type level careers. They're not interested in that. They're forced to take this ACT, which measures those specific skills in math and reading. Whatever their scores are still compared to other state scores, which again shows you why comparing state high stakes testing is just ridiculous. But the most ridiculous thing of this article is states that require an exit exam, which include the places that I'm from. I was born in El Paso, Texas. So Texas is one of those states. And I went to high school in New Mexico. And it's still one of those states where you're required to take an exit exam to get your diploma. So it would be interesting to know more about that as far as from these teachers of these states. What is on that exit exam, and what is the percentage of students that they complete all of their other requirements, but yet they fail that test, Mike, and then they don't get a diploma? Just disgusting to me to think that is actually happening, but it is. And it says that there's 13 states that require that as far as in 2017. So it's pretty recent information.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Exit exams. I was telling you off air that I had to take an exam, a math exam, to get my Bachelor of Education. Yes. And it was required to pass. I don't think that's the same as this, but it made me think of it because I have bad memories of, prepping for that and taking. I'll admit this will be not the first time I've told people this, but I failed it the first time.
Oh, that math exam?
Yep. So I failed it the first time. I did exactly what you tell students not to do. I rushed through it. I was super confident. I just went in and was like, I'm going to crush this stupid exam. And I didn't. Now, failure was, I think you had to get 70% or higher.
Sure.
So I think I got in the 50s. But it's brutal. I aced it. They give you exactly. Obviously. So you got a second chance. But the scary thing is, and for me, I had a kid at the time, and I wasn't, a young 20-something-year-old student. I was in my early 30s, and I had to graduate and then get a job so I could feed my family.
Sure.
It was a different So I was like, what if I failed this exam? I'm screwed in every possible way. I got 99% on it the second time. So in my defense, and I tell you, I'm doing some talks this summer where I'm going to talk about failure, and it's going to come up because it's the lesson that I want people to talk about is, learning from your stupid mistakes. But
it's fine. Yeah.
I mean,
High stakes tests are horrible.
These tests are the worst, just the worst. And the sooner we can start whittling down. I know the SAT, peaked up a little bit, but hopefully, I thought I had heard that a lot of people were dropping it, but I guess that's not the case.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the more that we use more comprehensive way of looking at our students instead of a one-time summative assessment, the better we are all going to be, including our students. They have a better opportunity to display the knowledge that they actually have attained throughout their schooling. And we all know that that's the case. We just need to start moving towards that actually happening and quit being pressured by these big testing companies. Because I know that these big book companies actually have a big hold on these tests too, Pearson and others. Yes, so that's the other part that people don't want to talk about, is how they are so interconnected with this testing and the curriculum that we are doing, and it's all at this kind of corporate level, which I think the more that we move away from that, the better that we're all going to be.
I've mentioned it before, but there's an episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver where he does a whole segment on the SATs and how they're dominated by basically a for-profit business and stuff like that. I'll see if I can find that. I know we've mentioned it before because obviously we talk about standardized testing a decent amount, but I'll see if I can find the video on YouTube and put it in the show notes for us. I was thinking about this next topic because we had Doug Levin on a few months ago. And so it's such a contrast in outcomes, where Doug Levin told us a story about a child who kind of subverted the rules of the school in terms of using an administrator login, and was getting basically raked through the coals by not only the school board, but the police and the court system. And you have now this story of a student who improved a classroom tech solution, and the company actually hired the student to work for them afterwards because he actually hacked the software and made it better.
Yeah. So it's kind of reminds me, it's called Vivi, VIVI, and it reminded me of like Apple Classroom. If you have those kind of devices in your class, where basically you could see what students are on their screens. There's other systems like Casper and other ones that are out there.
Smart has a system.
Smart one has one too. Yeah. And this one is in Australia, and this kid figured out a way to basically improve the screen mirroring and video screening technology. And the article starts with, it was the first time he actually asked somebody before he actually hacked something. And he just basically was saying, there's a better way to do this. And so he spoke with the company and kind of got in as a kind of he was their part-time employee. And he would go there after school and work on these projects. And eventually they were like, we need this kid to be part of our staff, because he's at the ground level, but he understands like all of the things that we don't understand at this kind of corporate level of developing these tools. So it's super awesome story of him being able to go through the process, and then him being encouraged and then actually rewarded in the end with a job at this company for having hacked in and learned how the intricacies of this system works and make improvements on it, which, man, I love stories like this when we can see that there's a huge benefit in involving our students in this process, and then getting their ideas and then rewarding them obviously for doing these things and then giving them careers in these fields.
That's the way to do it, man. This is such the opposite story of that terrible story from before.
Absolutely.
That it was great to see that, someone did it right, at least this time.
Yes.
Because this is exactly what we want to encourage kids to do, to learn from their experiences and stuff like that. And I guess speaking of experiences and learning from them, not only are we about to play you an amazing interview with Jordan Shapiro in a few minutes, but this other article that we just came across about, and I relate to this so well, and I won't spoil it because I talk about it in the interview with Jordan, but this idea that the article's headline from video game to day job, how SimCity inspired a generation of city planners. And I mean, SimCity was formative for me.
Yes.
As a person, as a teacher, as a games-based learning teacher, it was super formative for me. Just like I talk about Civilization and I bring up World of Warcraft as well. I learned so much from this game and the way of thinking about it. But this person not only found SimCity formative, but then converted it to a real career as basically a city planner, and so it became truly formative for these folks.
Yeah, no, it's such an awesome thing to be inspired by a game and then say, like, this person actually, her quote is, I had no idea people actually did this in real life, basically
Sure.
city planning, became super passionate about it and basically used this game in her childhood and her teen years and then said, oh my goodness, I can actually do this in real life. And what does that actually involve? And be super interested in it, so passionate about it that you then form it into a successful career. If anyone has never played games like SimCity or City Skylines, I think we mentioned in a previous episode, such awesome games because they simulate basically your decisions have impacts on your citizens. And then you have to continue to try to solve problems. And it's those same types of problems that you would find in a real city. For example, where are you going to put your sewage plant? What kind of energy are you going to use? You could go for the cheap energy, but yet it's going to pollute the citizens and your citizens are going to get sick. So all of these decisions are intricate in how you decide to play it. And you can run these different types of simulations as they did, and then learn from them and then be able to come back to the game and make better decisions. Just super awesome. We love these kind of games, and we love that there's a situation here where they published a whole entire article in the Los Angeles Times about how it changed someone's career.
It's preaching to the choir to tell us, and probably to tell a lot of people that listen to our podcast, that video games can help with learning and can be formative in what you learn and how you learn and how you transfer those skills to your life and your daily activities and your future career. But it's great to see. Listen, the more articles about this stuff, the better. This is how we really get the word out, is when it becomes mainstream and something that everyone is seeing and realizing. And so, a great article, we'll link it in the show notes. It's fun to read an article like this because it definitely affirms what, we've tended to
talk
believe.
About. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. When we come back, we are not going to be doing a part 2 because we have a very special extended interview with Jordan Shapiro. We talk about all of the things we just kind of talked about and discuss the topics related to his new book, The New Childhood, which is out now. So stay tuned. It's a great interview. And when we come back, Jordan Shapiro.
Quests. One of Classcraft's most popular features, with over 100,000 lessons created by teachers and 3 million learning objectives completed by students so far, is now part of Classcraft's free offerings. In 2019, your students won't just be learning multiplication, chemistry, or any other content. They'll be saving the kingdom. Transform your lessons into adventures with Quests today. Visit classcraft.com for more information.
All right, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We're beyond thrilled to be joined today by Jordan Shapiro. Jordan is a professor, an author, a speaker. Probably most of the folks listening to the pod know him fairly well, or at least know his work. His new book, The New Childhood, is available now, and he's here to talk to us about it today. Welcome to the podcast, Jordan.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
As we were just talking off air, that both of us are fathers of boys who love to play video games, and this book really hits home with us. And in the book, you describe some frustrations that Mike and I actually worry about, as well as any parents can relate to, specifically when children seem detached from real life when they're playing their video games. It just happened this morning again to me. And you state that age-appropriate obsessiveness is not unique to the digital world, that our kids are focused, not isolated. And in fact, most of the time when they're staring at the screens, they're connected to a community. So what's your advice to us as parents and educators about our worries when our kids seem obsessed with these video games?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question I get all the time, and there's sort of there's multiple components to it. We'll see how many I remember as I try to answer the question. The first thing is you did that quote about age appropriate obsessiveness, and I really put that in because so many people come to me and they go, well, these video games are addictive because I'll ask my kid to come to the dinner table and he just ignores me. And I'm always like, yeah, but that's just kids, right? And the story I've been telling a lot lately, I wish I had put it in the book, but it hadn't happened yet, is my youngest one, who's now 11. My son is 11, and he loves Lego. I mean, he's a crazy master builder Lego kind of guy, and he saves up his allowance and his gifts from his grandparents and his aunts and uncles. Whenever there's like a birthday or something, he saves all this money up and he buys the giant sets that I would never buy him because I'm like, that's too expensive, but he buys them himself. And what can you say when a kid's like done saving? You're like, I have to encourage that, even if I still think it's a waste of his money. I don't want to tell him, right? but and I don't think it's a waste. He's having a great time anyway. He builds these enormous sets, and invariably right before it's time to leave for school, once he's dressed and ready to go, he decides, oh, it's a great time to go put three more bricks on. And when I say, no, it's time to go, we have a screaming match, right? He's just as upset about the Lego as it is. I was just as upset about I used to play the piano as a kid, and my mother couldn't get me to stop practicing because I wanted to practice all the time. This is totally normal for kids, and what we do as parents is we nag them and we nag them and we nag them, and we hope that by the time they're adults, they're better at organizing their priorities. Sometimes they will, as we all know. Sometimes they will be, sometimes they won't. Just like we're sometimes good at it and sometimes we're bad at it. But we want them to have that voice in their head that tells them how to think about that, and so the nagging becomes a really important factor. And I find that parents are sort of worried when they have to nag, but I sort of think if you didn't have to nag, then they wouldn't need parents, right? So that's sort of point one. And then the second thing you brought up was this notion of they're focused but not isolated. And I think there's a couple points there, which is the other side of this, besides the sort of parent frustration that I have to nag my kids, is they think they're alone. They think they've escaped. They think they've disappeared into another world. And I think what I really want to emphasize so much, and so much of the New Childhood tries to emphasize, is they didn't escape into a new world. They are using the tools that are the tools of this world through which you build communities and communications. And they're just focused on that. I'll just say one more point about this, which is a lot of people tend to think, especially with Fortnite, they think of it as like my kid's addicted and stuck in Fortnite. But what I see with my kids is they come home and all of their friend group from school logs on at the same time, and they're just doing what I did as a kid, which is I would lie on the couch with the phone to my ear and the cord tangled around my finger, right? Because the phone's had cord, and it would be hours, and my mom would have to be, you've been on the phone for an hour, you're not saying anything important, you need to stop. That's all they're doing, is they're trying to maintain their school community, and they have a party line, and I kind of watch my kids sometimes, and I'm like, you kind of don't care about what's happening in the game. It's sort of the background. It's the socialization that's exciting, and I find that fascinating, because parents are so afraid of these things being isolating when the kids are excited about it because it's socializing.
The irony. Well, and that actually comes right into this next question. That, I mean, I love that you don't pull your punches in this book, and you fight against quite a few positions that are kind of, you hear them all the time. Probably my most favorite one that you speak about is the issue of screen time. And in the end, you remind readers that the screen time is virtually the same now as it was in the 90s, and that it's the screen that's different, not necessarily the amount of time that people are spending on it. And I feel like the screen time objection is a bit of a red herring for a number of other fears, including the simple fear of change. And that's kind of what you're getting at now, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, first I want to clarify the numbers here because I don't want anyone to think that I misrepresented any numbers. Which is there's certainly, if we do like full device time, it's probably more than it was in the 90s. But the reason in the part of the book that you're talking about where I say it's the same is that if you look at the amount of time kids are spending watching videos, so watching
Sure. Yeah.
videos on YouTube, watching Netflix, watching television, watching, doing what screen time really is, what we mean when we say screen time, because this is a word that comes from the television era, right? That's
Yeah.
sort of the point. Well, first, let me say that those numbers are the same, but total time using devices is a different metric altogether. And I'm making that distinction because when we talk about screen time, we're so caught in this television mindset, and screen time made sense as something to be worried about during the television days. I mean, I don't know if it made sense to be worried about, but as a term, as a framing, it made sense because the television is absolutely a content consumption device, right? You sit there passively receiving the content,
Yeah.
and so it made sense to go, how much time are you spending with that screen? But then there's all the other things that you can do with today's screens, and I don't think they should be considered in the same category as screen time, right? So it gets back to my to the previous question, which is if it's socialization time, is that the same as screen time, right? Or one of the points I make a lot, which is if your kid were to spend 8 hours a day composing electronic music on their PC, would you find that to be a bad thing? Would you be like, hey, we
Right.
need to quell their passionate creativity because they're spending too much time with their eyes on the screen? No, but probably if your kid spends 8 hours a day watching like toy unpacking videos, whatever they call it, is like where they open the toys on YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm all for limiting that kind of screen. Like, there's not, like, this is pure advertising. This is not of anything good. I think we really need to ask not what the screen time is, because what we'll see is screen time has been the same for generations if you think of it as that passive consumption, but more what are all the different things they're doing on those screens, and what are the benefits, what are the negatives, what do we want them to be doing?
Well, and it's about balance, right? I mean, Glenn and I have talked about this all the time, the difference between good screen time and bad screen time, and the good use of video games, which, I mean, we're the choir in this, so we all kind of agree on this.
Yes.
But like, there's good use of video games and there's bad use of video games, and I mean, there's a difference, and so it is.
There's
just
also
about
good
balance.
and bad. There's also good and bad video games. I mean, one of the like gifts of my profession is that people are always sending me games to test. So my kids are spoiled. They have every game, and there's some games they turn on. I mean, I joke about this all the time. People think they're obsessed with video games. No, they'll turn them on all the time and go, "This game stinks. I'm going outside."
Yes,
right? Outside is more fun.
Exactly.
Yes. So in the book, Jordan, you discuss the concept of sandboxes quite a bit, both physical and digital ones. You give a history of the physical ones and kind of a backstory, which I really enjoyed. Just learning about that stuff, because I didn't really know those concepts as far as how that came to be and how revolutionary they actually were, the physical ones. But we also have digital ones, like the ones you might find in Minecraft and like Fortnite we were just talking about, and how it's so important. It's such an important part of the development of our youth. Can you talk to our audience more about that?
Yeah. Well, I'll say a few things. One, the part of the book that you're talking about is the part where I give the history of the sandbox. And there's sort of what I don't say in the book, which I'll say now, is I found out about this. This kind of happened by accident. Okay, I was starting to study. It started out I was studying how video games work. I was discovering that video games and great video games and great teachers have many things in common. And then I started to get into playful learning, and I wanted to understand the different ways that play worked, right? So what do we know about play? For example, we know that through play, kids develop things like executive function and self-regulation skills and all these social emotional skills. And that's, just to make that clear, the simplest way I can think of to explain that to people is kids want to have fun. They want to have fun all the time, and they'll do anything they can to maintain fun. And in order to learn how to maintain fun, you have to learn how to work with other people. You have to learn how to do conflict resolution, right? Because if you're on the playground as a 6-year-old trying to play make-believe and there's all these tensions, there's all these other things happening, and you have to balance all of those simultaneously, all the different variables simultaneously in order to preserve the game, to preserve the fun. That's all they're trying to do. That's something that gets developed really well in a sandbox. If you just think about this yourself as a kid, maybe you think about it on the beach is easier than the sandbox. I don't know, but you have to learn you don't step on other people's castles, you don't grab their shovels, you have to share, sometimes you have to work together, you have to collaborate to build things. Lots of important skills. Well, I discovered all this because I found a little book written by G. Stanley Hall, who was the sort of preeminent American psychologist at the beginning of the 20th century. And he was writing a book because sandboxes were brand new. And parents were really worried that these sandboxes were bad because, back to the original question, the first question you guys asked, which is parents were panicked that their kids wouldn't come in from playing in the sand when it was time for dinner. Parents were panicked that their kids were wasting so much time in these sandboxes. And I read this and I went, oh my God, parents were just as worried about sandboxes as today's parents are about video games. What it hit home for me is it taught me that the way we play, the way that kids play is always situated in an economic context, a technological context, a cultural context, a social context, right? It's never just neutral. There's no such thing. Even sandboxes is not just a neutral play that has always existed and always been considered good since the beginning of time, right? There was a point right at the beginning of the industrial era, right at the beginning of the 20th century, where suddenly the sandboxes became important because they taught the kind of individuality, the kind of entrepreneurship, the kind of innovative mindset, all these things we talk about, like when we talk about character skills, right? All those things, perseverance. It taught all these skills really well while kids were just playing. And so eventually people embraced the sandbox. And so what I'm really arguing, and the reason I bring it in, is that when you understand that play is never neutral, that it's always situated with some kind of technology and economic paradigm and social paradigm and cultural paradigm, well, that means we need to adjust for a changing social paradigm. And that's where I come to Minecraft or Fortnite or any of these sandbox games. I mean, it's a sort of a coincidence that they're called sandbox games. I think any games that are social are building those skills mediated through a specific tool set, right? Our kids are going to have to grow up. I had to grow up I grew up with technology like you guys did, but the generation before, there was a lot of handiwork. There were a lot of kinds of collaboration that was face-to-face like you have in a sandbox. Nowadays, a lot of our collaboration is digital. I mean, I'm waiting for someone to give us a real clear statistics of how much of the daily, how much of our social emotional skills we use as adults are through digital devices. I suspect we're up to the majority of it. The majority of the interactions we have to have, social, professional, are digital at this point. And so how do you teach kids to have the skills to be able to do that the same way we had to teach them the skills to be able to collaborate in a work around a conference table? And that's why I love the idea of sandbox games, because they give kids this opportunity to practice conflict resolution, collaboration, creativity in groups mediated through a specific tool set.
That was an amazing response, and it actually answered the following question, which is because you brought up something that I had actually tweeted that got quite a few responses from educators, because that's the majority of, I would say, of our audience is educators, where I tweeted that great video games share a lot in common with great teachers. And I think that, teachers hear us talk about video games all the time, Mike and I. We usually lead with something about something we're doing or playing with our kids and how impactful it is in our lives, not just our lives, but our kids' lives too. But I love this part that you say that they share a lot in common with great teachers, that both are rigorous, responsive, reflective, and real. Talk more about that, because I want our educators to be able to hear that so that they don't fear these video games that these kids are playing, that they understand that they are also great teachers. These games are.
Oh, well, this gets to what we were saying a little bit earlier, which is there's both good games and bad games. First thing I would say is that what the difference between a good game and a bad game is almost the same as the difference between a good teacher and a bad teacher. I mean, that's a little bit of a broad generalization because I'm sure there's lots of small factors that could be also that I'm not even considering. But let's just take the premise for now. They again, they're, as you used them. Let's see if I can remember. I can always forget those 4 R's in order: rigorous, did I do responsive, reflective, and real?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I should go through them. I guess I'll go through them all for a second. You know, the rigorous is games, just like teachers, need to have just the right level of challenge. They can't be too easy. They can't be too hard. Right? A game that's too. Imagine Mario Brothers. You couldn't fall off the platform, and there were no Koopa Troopas. Right? All you do is run to the flag. It'd be the worst game ever. You'd be bored. Right? Also imagine, as we know, there are some games, right, that are just so hard to beat that you stop. Cuphead is sort of a great example that like
Yes.
it's really, really hard. Cuphead.
Really hard.
Yeah, if it weren't for the great animation and the great music, I think most people would have left because it's so hard to play. So it has to meet that place in the middle where you can feel success and also feel challenged. That's what I quote in the book is it comes from Lev Vygotsky, the Russian educationalist / psychologist who talked about it. Now he was a socialist in the Soviet Union, so when he was talking about it, it was also about community. It was also about the idea, not just what do I need to do to, not just getting to the zone of proximal development that's between hard and easy, but also where is the place where what I can do on my own versus what I need to ask a teacher or a friend or another person for help from. So, and that's where you want to keep everything. I think that still fits with video games pretty well. One, in today's multiplayer games, there's lots of things you need to ask for other players for. But even if you go back to our games as kids, again, Super Mario Brothers, right? There's always like a power up that you need right at the right moment, right? You can't use the skills you had right before you go through the door. It gets much harder. So you sort of need to always be in this place of having to get external help for it. So that's the rigorous. The next one is responsive, which is about feedback, right? Great teachers and for great games give you constant feedback. If you want to think about this in terms of video games, you would just say, imagine if you didn't know why Pac-Man died. Like that'd be the most frustrating game. Like you're just playing and he dies, right? You don't know why. What do you do next? You'd quit that too. You'd find it frustrating. You'd be bored, and you'd stop. And again, all great teachers know we call it formative assessment in the educational world, right? We all know that that actually way more important than the summative assessment is the constant formative assessment, and it doesn't even have. I hate the term formative assessment because it sounds like formal, right? So, right? And it's often casual. It's often just about the fact that I can look around the room, ask a question, say who remembers what we were talking about last class, and I can see how many people are focused, and I either give them the positive or the negative feedback, and I can often do that with my eyes or my body language. Or sometimes we do it in more formal ways. Often we do it in more formal ways, but you have to do both. And video games do that. Teachers do that. Same thing that makes them engaging. The next one is reflective, which is about the metacognition idea in education, right? In education, we call that metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. And by the way, that's tied up in all the growth mindset stuff too, right?
Yes,
So this idea that if I recognize it's not me that failed the test, but my performance on the test that wasn't adequate, right? Being able to separate my identity or myself from my performance, right? That's the sort of growth mindset way of framing it. Metacognition is just recognizing that I'm an I learning, right? It's not who I am completely. And in video games, like I've always said, this is just built right in, right? Because there's the I that holds the controller, and then there's the I that's in the game. And although while we're playing the game, we go, oh no, I died, right? We also know that I didn't die. I can start the game over and I can try again. And I have that sort of growth mindset of failure. And then the last one is real. And video games aren't real, but they are experiential and they are hands-on, right? And they do feel real while you're playing them.
Yes,
and they do have real consequences in the sense that there's a system that's clear, right? It's not like they're not real life. They're not, there's, I don't mean stakes, right? It's not like real stakes, right? Like you're not going to die. There's no chance of getting hurt, but there are immediate consequences to your actions. And to that sense, in that way, it feels real, where when you're reading a textbook, there's no consequences to whether or not you understand chemistry or not, right? But if you build it into a hands-on activity, as any chemistry teacher knows, then you immediately see the real consequences of those ideas. And so games do that phenomenally well. They put all those things together. People should certainly still be afraid of some games, because I'm not saying games are like broccoli because they happen to use like they don't have vitamins in them, right? I'm saying that they're engaging because they do all of those things, and that's why kids can learn them so well, right? If you look at, I mean, I think all adults should always need to stop and realize, especially those who don't play video games, when you see a kid playing a video game, one of the reasons you don't play as an adult is because it's so complicated and it scares you, right? It's so complex. Kids can learn that in 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, they turn it on, and you could too as an adult, because good games teach you the language, they teach you the system, they teach you the physics, they teach you the rules very quickly, and very effectively. And those people who have built the really great video games for learning have used all of that in learning. So, I'm a big fan. I talk about it all the time. Dragon Box, any of the Dragon Box games, which are apps for teaching. The first one was apps for teaching algebra, and basically it just turned all the numbers and variables into cute pictures, and then introduced new powers. Right? Did you know you can make something negative? That's a new power up you just got. You can make something negative, and they do it right. And I watched my kids when they first did it. My youngest was 4. I watched him solve complex algebraic equations. It took him like 3 hours, but by the time he was done, he could, like, with a slider solve he didn't know what it was, and he'll probably forget it by the time he gets to algebra class. But I watched how he could do it on the screen at that point. So it's not necessarily that because something teaches, it's therefore good. I don't want to make that suggestion, because you asked, can you say it to make so the people who are afraid are not afraid? Well, you should certainly be afraid. You can teach lots of bad things, right? You could, there's good teachers who are radicalizing people all the time. I'm guessing they're fantastic teachers, the people who radicalize terrorists. Like, imagine what a great teacher you have to be to convince people to do something deadly.
Exactly. No.
Right. So certainly worry about it, but the idea to imagine that games are frivolous, the idea to imagine that games are stupid, that's ridiculous. They're complex, they're sophisticated, and they're full of teaching. And we should be deeply concerned about whether they're teaching good things or bad things. That's sort of part of the core concern of the book, is how do we make sure that this digital play, which is so powerful, gets used for good.
Awesome.
So I'm thinking about a bunch of. I mean, my head is just going crazy right now, which is so much fun. And I've been thinking while you were talking about the games that influenced me, and I come back to 3, and we're gonna actually talk about one. We talked about one on the podcast today earlier. I think about World of Warcraft, I think about Civilization, and I think about SimCity. And when I think about those 3 games specifically, these are exactly the types of games I think we're talking about. They have all of those elements. And I actually wrote an autoethnography when I was doing my postgraduate on the experience of being a guild leader. And how being a guild leader in World of Warcraft gave me transferable skills that I'm not sure I could have received elsewhere, at least not in the same way, and certainly not as quickly, which I find, it was a great experience. And while now I have children, and it's virtually impossible for me to be a raid leader in a World of Warcraft guild now, maybe we can talk just quickly about we're talking about transferable skills. The idea is that these games are giving us skills and abilities and habits that this is probably the best way to learn some of these things now, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's the best, but I know it's effective.
Yeah.
And that question of transferable is a big issue, I think. And there's people have started to study whether or not the skills are really transferable. That's the kind of study that I'm sort of I sort of don't buy into, more because I think it's going to certainly take some level of mentorship. I don't know whether you had any that made it transferable. You may have just done it yourself somehow. But what really scares me about the way a lot of people approach digital play is they think of it as something separate that kids do. And if the kids start to get the message that this is something separate and other, then none of that is going to be transferable, right? Then none of those leadership skills. My older son loves Civilization, plays it all the time. He loves all these kinds of strategy games. But I think because I'm so gung-ho, let me understand what you're doing, let me talk to you about it, when he's in history class, ends up thinking about how they connect, right? He starts to use the sort of language of the game to imagine how do you think about what happened in world history, which is a great thing to do because Civilization is full of these sort of questions of resources and geopolitics, and is a great way to think about this macro picture of historic trends. But you need that mentorship to be able to transfer it. If his whole life I had been like, go in your room and play your stupid game, or why don't you ever come out from playing your stupid game, I don't think he would think of it as something that he should try to connect to what he's doing in school. And so we need to encourage those kinds of connections in order to take those positive lessons and make sure they end up in the world, in the way they think about their digital lives and the way they think about their non-digital lives. And that involves parents really getting rid of this strange binary. This is back to the screen time question, this strange binary we have between digital life and non-digital life, when it's not realistic anymore, right? It's impossible. I don't know if it's impossible, but I would guess if we asked 50 people to try to live their lives for a week without any digital connections, right? How would they maintain their social relationships, their professional relationships, or even do their work? I think it would be almost impossible for most people. And so what we want to do is teach our kids how to integrate this into their lives in healthy, positive ways, and that's not happening with this huge separation. One of the things that I do want to say is sort of off topic, but only slightly, but we got to it, which is so many people imagine, because they've heard me talk, that I'm this super pro screen time, everything, it's great, let your kids play more video games guy. I'm actually just as concerned about all the things that the anti-screen time people are. I just think the attitude of, hey, we need to have the on-off switch mentality, or what I call the binge and purge digital detox mentality.
Sure.
I think that's the wrong way to solve our concern, which is, are these kids going to have no social skills? Yeah, they're going to have no social skills if you don't teach them how to transfer the digital social skills into meaningful ethical life. If grown-ups don't get involved in that, then you've got a Lord of the Flies situation going on, and that is what we have in some ways. Some of what happens on Twitch and YouTube I find to be appalling, especially because the kids are just watching it as if these are idols, right? And the parents don't know it well enough to even counteract it. I don't mind that my kids watch someone that I disagree with. They'll find that on TV all the time too, but at least I understand what's going on TV, so I can say to them, hey, you really believe that guy? Why would you believe that guy? He's an idiot. He's a bad person. He's immoral, right? I can have that discussion with them. Parents are so not involved with their digital lives, so they're not able to frame that. And it gets worse when I think it gets worse when you're like, okay, you're allowed 2 hours of screen time a day. I don't want to know what's going on there. So now you have this temptation world of sin that they're allowed. They're allowed in sin world for 2 hours a day. Right? Well, how could that end up good? How could that end up good if you're allowed? I don't want to tell my kid, you're not allowed to do something I think is evil for 2 hours a day. You're never allowed to do things I think are evil.
Funny.
Oh, that's awesome.
At the end of each section of your book, you have takeaways, the big points in the chapter. And in your section on the new learning objectives, I found your takeaways a super powerful distillation of how school needs to change. It was like you were speaking right to the way that I want to teach and how I want to embody education myself. And I swear to God, like, I think we take those 3 takeaways, put them on a poster, and put that poster in every wall of every school. And I mean, if folks can just work towards those, they would have done something huge. And I'll tell you, it made me think that this is a team effort. That buy-in for all of these big changes that need to happen require participation at a lot of different levels. We all have to be invested in this change, from teachers to parents to administrators to principals to superintendents. Everyone has to realize that the world is changing right in front of us, and our kids are different than we were, and our parents were, and their parents. And we all have to be invested in moving with this change and working together to navigate it properly, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that in the New Childhood I write that there's a whole section on school for those who haven't even looked at it yet. The book's divided into 4 sections, and one's all about school and education. And I tried really hard to make that section on school and education really. How do I say? I was going to say general, but I don't want it to sound like it's not specific either, right? But what I didn't want it to be is, here's how you teach math, here's how you teach English, here's right. What I wanted to do was talk about the ways of thinking that had to change both for the students and for the teachers, so that teachers could then, and students and parents, right, but anyone who's reading it could be sort of creative about how do I apply that shift in the way we think about the world to what I already know so well, right? Because almost everything that teachers teach, I'm going to say almost, but it's probably even more than almost, right? It's 99.9% of what teachers teach is completely applicable forever. Okay. Right, like math is not going anywhere, literature is not going anywhere, grammar is not going anywhere. These will all be important, but the way that we use these things and the way that they shape the way our lives, the way we talk about, the way we use these language. I mean, they're all languages in some ways, right? Math is a language I use to describe the world in terms of interval, right? So that you and I can talk about how to measure things, right? I don't need math if I live alone in a tree, right? Like, it's of no use to me living. It's only of you, right? I might understand the world mathematically, but I don't need algebraic language. I only need that if I need to communicate that math knowledge to somebody else, or want to collaborate with someone else. But the ways that we end up doing that collaboration, the ways we end up articulating our vision, ourself, our things we care about, the world we want to create, is always based in some sort of tools. And so what I really wanted to do was go, how does a math teacher think about different ways of presenting information, different ways of doing pedagogy, different ways of bringing these things into their lives? I mean, I just looked at, when you just mentioned this, I decided, I picked up the book and looked at the takeaways, because I couldn't remember what they were from that chapter. But I reading them, I think I'm going to read them to you, if you don't mind. Is that okay? Can I do that?
Don't mind. Do it.
I want to talk about them, I think, because I think you're totally right. I hadn't realized how much of the ones in this chapter went together, but now that I do it, I go, yeah, they really do get to it. And the first one is teach kids to see themselves as nodes of connection, points through which knowledge is transmitted across time and space. And I think what I'm trying to get to with that point is, we used to think of students as one of two things, right? Either the repositories of information, so the teacher just hands them knowledge that they store in their brain, and then they have to prove on a test that they have well memorized. Well, that's certainly not useful anymore, right? We all have a memory device in our pockets. Our smartphone allows us to grab anything at any time. So the ability to reposit and recall information is not what matters. What matters instead is, how do you use that information, right? How can you understand that information well enough to know what to search for and how to use what you searched for? So that's still critical, right? You still need to teach all these things, because otherwise, how do you know what to do? My son the other day was working on a project. I don't remember what it was. It was some mountain range he was studying. He couldn't figure out I was like, how can that be hard? All you have to do is Google. But he didn't even know how to start. He was like, I can only come up with 3 sentences and it has to be 6 paragraphs. And I just sit with him and go, well, did you look at the geology of the mountain range? Have you looked at the history of the mountain range? When was it a border? When wasn't it a border? Right? What's the biome like? Right? There were all these things that he hadn't even considered that you have to think about. And once I gave him a list of those, he was, there was more information than he knew what to do with. That's what he needs to learn. Like, he can find it all. It's all there. More information than I could have found at the library anywhere. Right? Like, you could go to the Harvard Library. It didn't have as much information as Google has right now. That's all accessible to us. But the question is, how do you become a node? Right? How do you become a node that can take that information, make it useful, and connect it with someone else? Right? How do you do that? That's what we need to teach our kids. The second point here is schools need more interdisciplinary activities that provide students with opportunities to extract information from mixed data sets, turn it into knowledge that becomes relevant in unexpected contexts. And I think that gets to the same point I'm making in the previous point. I mean, they're almost the same. It's this idea that there's so much data, and it's often about how do you connect data from unexpected places. And this is one that's really important to me, and it's what I do throughout the book, I think, is go, how do I take some history? How do I take some ancient philosophy? How do I take some modern neuroscience? How do I take economics and bring all of them together so they become meaningful in their connection? They become meaningful in a way that's really that can shape the way you think about the world and articulate things. We want our kids to be able to do that. That's the most important skill. That's what they're going to need to do when you're building anything. Even if you're inventing something like Uber, that means changing the way you think about what transportation is, changing the way you think about what business is. And that means you need to be able to draw different concepts from different places, bring them together, and turn them into something new. That's what our kids need in a world where data and information is so available. And the last one is just that our current education teaches kids to see themselves as rigid vessels, but the world demands that they be porous membranes. And that's, that has an ethical component, that has an intellectual component. I think that may even have a spiritual component to that point, depending on how you want to take it. But the bottom line is, so much of what we do in the education system is about dividing things up right now. We divide things into grades, we divide them into subjects, we divide them into rankings of who's the best student, who's the worst student. We divide them into teachers and experts and non-experts. We divide them into administrators and teachers. There's everything's divided into rigid categories in education, and that made sense for the industrial era. I'm not even saying that's bad. A lot of people love to say that's bad. That was a brilliant thing we did in the industrial era that allowed us to break a complex, if you think about it in terms of factories, it allowed us to break a complex manufacturing process into lots of tiny little categories that could then be more efficient. It has allowed us to build medical science, which has helped so much of the world, right? Because we're able to break things down into cells. I mean, I don't know enough about biology to come up with a lot of examples, but just the fact that we can understand the difference between a bacteria and a virus and all these categories has allowed us to build so much. Our phones exist because of our ability to understand quarks and atoms and electrons and protons, divide the world into these pieces, which are all just ways of thinking. But that is no longer the world that we live in. We live in a world where everything is always connected, always on, always moving, and your ability to draw those connections is much better. Your ability to allow is much more important, right? Your ability to allow those things to move through you. So that's what I'm saying. We don't want them to see themselves as singular objects, rigid vessels. We want them to start to see themselves as porous membranes, things through which knowledge can move through, and maybe they change, maybe it doesn't. That information moves through, that ideas move through. People who connect. You cannot, you can't imagine yourself as something separate from others. That's how we end up with angry xenophobia. That's how we end up with nationalism. Absolutely. Is when you just think about how you're separate from things, and those are important categories. But we need to understand, those identity categories not as things that separate us, but as things that allow us to connect. Right?
Yes.
I might be a man. I might be Caucasian. I might be Jewish. I might be American. If I choose to identify that, but that should be the opportunity through which I'm able to say, hey, now we can talk to each other because I know who I am, rather than because I am that, I'm away, I need to move away from you. Right?
For sure.
Right,
Absolutely.
right. So the New Childhood is available everywhere you can buy books. Everyone should go pick it up now. There'll be a link to purchase it in our show notes. Jordan, this has been amazing.
Man.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Hopefully everyone reads this book, because I think it's absolutely critical. If you're a parent, this is the book to read 100%. Thanks for joining us, Jordan.
It's my pleasure. It's been great to be here, and I love what you guys do.
Awesome.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to On Education. My name is Mike Washburn. My co-host is Glen Irvin. Want to get in touch with us? Check out our website at oneducationpodcast.com. You can tweet us at oneducationpod. Glen is at Irv Spanish on Twitter. I can be found on Twitter at Mr. Washburn. You can find us on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/oneducationpod. If you're enjoying the show and think others would too, we'd love if you shared it with them. Please leave us a rating or review in the Apple Podcast or Google Play Store. When you leave a rating, it gives our rankings a boost, and this helps others discover the show. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Schoology, for supporting us. Check out Schoology.com to learn how they can help you advance what's possible. Thanks as always for listening. Stay awesome, and we'll see you soon.